The stench of blood clung to the air long before Rebecca saw him. At first, she thought it was a trick of the early morning light, a dark shape in the dust, motionless beneath the brittle shade of a thorn tree. But as the jeep creaked to a halt, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a shadow, it was a lion, or what was left of one. Flies swarmed his wounds, feeding on the raw, torn flesh where his mane had once been proud. His ribs pushed against thin skin, each shallow breath a fight against surrender. The poachers had done their damage and left him to die, stripped of dignity, stripped of strength. His eyes were closed, his massive body slack in defeat. But something made Rebecca jump from the jeep before the engine had even stopped. Her boots hit the dirt, kicking up clouds of dust as she rushed to his side. Her heart hammered so hard it made her vision blur. She knelt beside him, afraid to touch, afraid he was already gone. But then, barely there, she saw it. The faintest rise and fall of his chest. Her breath trembled out of her lungs, her fingers brushing the side of his neck, desperate for a pulse. It flickered beneath her fingertips, weak and unsteady, but alive. He was alive. Her throat tightened. She had seen too many animals lost to cruelty, too many arrived too late to save. But not this time. Not him. Not if she could stop it. She pressed her palm gently over his heaving ribs, feeling the fragile spark of life inside him. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't leave us. Not yet." The other rangers joined her, grim faces shadowed by sorrow, but Rebecca barely heard them. Her focus was on the lion, this warrior clinging to the edge of existence. Every part of her refused to let go of hope. She called for the emergency kit, for stretchers, for anything they could find. As they scrambled to action, Rebecca kept her eyes on the lion's battered frame, her heart burning with a quiet fury and fierce resolve. He had been left for dead, but she would not let that be the end of his story. Not today. Not while there was still even one heartbeat left. The stretcher wasn't built for a lion. It buckled under his weight, the torn canvas straining as they struggled to lift his broken body from the dirt. Rebecca's hands were slick with sweat and blood, her breath sharp in her chest, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every time she thought he might slip away, she saw the shallow rise of his ribs and pushed harder. They were racing against something cruel and fast, and every second felt like a grain of sand falling through an unforgiving hourglass. The team worked in grim silence, their faces tight with fear and doubt. Rebecca could feel it in their glances, in the way their eyes sometimes drifted away from the lion, as though preparing themselves for the moment when hope would give out. But she wouldn't let herself look away. His pulse was still there, fragile but fighting, and she'd promised him. She had promised she wouldn't let him go. The ride back to the rehabilitation center felt endless. The truck jolted over the rough tracks, and every bump sent a shudder through the lion's ravaged body. Rebecca cradled his massive head in her lap, her palm pressed gently against his temple, as if her touch alone could anchor him to life. She spoke to him in a low, steady voice. Words meant more for herself than for him, but maybe, just maybe, he heard them. "Stay with me. You're not done yet." Flashbacks of her first field days bled into her thoughts. She remembered the first time she'd faced an injured animal, the way her hands had trembled as she cleaned its wounds, the crushing guilt of arriving too late. But this time was different. She wasn't too late. Not yet. The rehab center came into view, and Rebecca's heart clenched. They burst through the gates, the medical team already waiting. The urgency in their movement sent a flicker of dread through her, but she held tight to her resolve. As they lifted the lion onto the operating table, Rebecca kept her eyes on his face, on the faint twitch of his whiskers. "You fight," she whispered, voice rough but unyielding. "You fight, and I'll fight with you." The monitors beeped in an uneven rhythm, sharp against the silence of the clinic. Rebecca stood over the lion's battered body, her hands stiff from hours of work, but she wouldn't step away. She watched the line of his pulse dance weakly on the screen, willing it to hold steady. His breathing came in shallow, fragile waves, rattling against lungs that had barely escaped collapse. Every rise and fall felt like a tiny rebellion against death, and Rebecca clung to it. They had cleaned the wounds, stitching torn muscle with painstaking care. Infection had already begun its cruel work, and they fought it with every tool they had. Saline dripped slowly into his veins, antibiotics coursing through him like reinforcements in a war he hadn't chosen to fight. His eyes remained closed, but Rebecca never stopped speaking to him. Her voice was a quiet lifeline, filling the sterile room with words meant to reach a place deeper than pain. "You're not alone anymore," she said, her throat raw from exhaustion. "We're here. I'm here." Time blurred at the edges. Night gave way to morning. Then morning folded into another heavy dusk. The team rotated, faces tight with fatigue, but Rebecca refused to leave his side. She wiped sweat from her brow, blinking against the burn in her eyes, unwilling to surrender even a moment of vigilance. Then, as if in answer to every silent prayer, his eyelids fluttered. Barely more than a flicker, but it was enough to send a jolt through Rebecca's tired heart. She stepped closer, breath caught in her chest, watching as his eyes, clouded with pain but undeniably alive, opened the smallest crack. He saw her. She felt it deep in her bones. In that fleeting second, she knew he wasn't giving up. Relief broke over her like a storm, but she swallowed it down, focusing on what mattered most. His pulse steadied, stronger now, the monitors responding to his quiet fight. He wasn't out of danger, not even close, but he had chosen to stay in the fight. Rebecca leaned closer, her voice a trembling whisper filled with fierce, burning hope. "That's it," she said. "Keep going. We're not letting you go." Rebecca barely slept. Her world had narrowed to the slow, uncertain rhythm of the lion's breath and the fragile beat of his heart. Every small sign of strength felt like a miracle carved from the edge of despair. She refused to look away, refused to let him face the battle alone, even as her body screamed for rest. She lived moment to moment, watching over him, willing him to take one more breath, then another. The first time he lifted his head, it was no more than a tremor of muscles, a small shift that sent a bolt of hope through her chest. His eyes, dim but aware, found hers across the space between life and loss. She felt her throat tighten as she swallowed the surge of emotion rising within her. She didn't speak right away. She simply held his gaze, steady and unwavering, letting him see what words could never fully say. She was here. She wasn't leaving. They began to call him Majestic, not out of sentiment, but because he had earned the name. Even torn and frail, there was a dignity in him, a strength that had not been stripped away by cruelty. He bore his pain with a quiet defiance, as though daring fate to try and finish what the poachers had started. Rebecca saw it every time she cleaned his wounds, every time she coaxed water between his cracked lips. His body trembled under the weight of recovery, but his eyes never lost that fire. He wanted to live. He fought for it with every flicker of strength he could summon. The Rangers, once certain he wouldn't survive the night, began to gather quietly at the clinic's edge, watching his progress with something like reverence. Whispers of hope traveled through the camp, cautious but growing. Rebecca felt it too, deep in her bones. She saw it in the way Majestic shifted, trying to push himself upright on trembling legs, Her heart thundered as he rose, weak and shaking, his body betraying him at every turn. But he did not collapse. He stood, if only for a moment, and in that breathless second, the room seemed to hold its breath with him. Rebecca's voice broke through the stillness, soft but fierce. "You're coming back to us," she whispered. "I know you are." The news of Majestic's fight for life spread beyond the dusty borders of the camp faster than anyone could have expected. What started as quiet whispers among the rangers became headlines, then ripples of hope shared across continents. Rebecca never thought about the cameras or the articles. Her world was still contained within the four walls of the clinic, within the steady rhythm of Majestic's heartbeat. But every letter that arrived, every message from strangers who had seen his story, felt like another pair of hands helping to carry him forward. Children from cities Rebecca had never visited sent drawings of lions, their small, clumsy letters filled with courage. Volunteers she had never met offered supplies, donations, anything they could give. She read the messages aloud at Majestic's side, her voice cracking with emotion. Even if he didn't understand the words, she believed he felt their warmth. Kindness had become the air he breathed, and Rebecca fed it to him in every way she could. Day by day, his strength grew. He pushed himself to rise without their help, testing his legs against the pull of gravity. His frame filled out, muscle returning where only bone had remained. Rebecca felt her chest swell every time he moved with more confidence. Every time he met her eyes and she saw something fiercer, something undeniably alive. Still, they weren't free of danger. Beneath his progress lay a quiet threat, the damage deep inside him that no stitch or salve could fully mend. Surgery loomed like a dark cloud, an operation so risky that the team barely spoke of it aloud. Without it, Majestic's progress would crumble. With it, they risked losing him entirely. Rebecca sat with him beneath the weak morning sun, her hand resting lightly on his side. She felt the steady rise and fall of his breath, the rhythm that had once been so fragile now strong beneath her palm. He turned his head toward her, and for a moment she felt the full weight of his trust settle between them. "We're not done yet," she said softly, determination burning in her chest. "You've come too far to stop now." Majestic's golden eyes, clear and focused, never left hers, and in that gaze she found all the courage she needed to face what was coming next. The day of the surgery arrived under a heavy, gray sky, as if the clouds themselves were holding their breath. Rebecca's chest ached with the weight of it, though she masked it behind quiet resolve. She had prepared for this moment endlessly, yet it still felt like stepping off a ledge into an unknown dark. Majestic lay calmly on the clinic floor, his breath even, his eyes steady as if sensing what was to come. She wondered if he knew how much rested on this final fight, how many hearts were tied to his survival. She knelt beside him as the anesthesia began to flow through his veins, her hand resting gently on his fur. "You're strong," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "Stronger than anyone knows. Stay with us." His eyes lingered on hers for a heartbeat longer, then slowly drifted closed, his mighty chest rising and falling under the weight of sleep. The room filled with urgency as the surgical team worked. Rebecca assisted, refusing to let fear find a foothold. Every moment stretched unbearably, each movement precise but heavy with risk. Blood loss, heart strain. A dozen threats hovered around them, waiting for a chance to claim him. But they fought them back with skill, with determination, with every ounce of human effort they could summon. Rebecca's hands moved with care she barely felt anymore, instinct guiding her through the haze of exhaustion and desperation. She felt more than saw the tremors in her fingers, but she pushed through them, refusing to falter. Majestic had not faltered. She would not either. Hours blurred, sweat stinging her eyes, her back burning from the strain of standing motionless for so long. And then, finally, the moment came. The wound was sealed, the worst of the internal damage repaired. The danger had not vanished, but the path forward had cleared. When they eased him from anesthesia, the entire room held its breath. Seconds passed like lifetimes until Majestic's chest lifted in a slow, powerful breath. His eyelids fluttered open, and Rebecca felt her heart catch. He was still here. He had stayed. Her knees nearly buckled from relief as she whispered, barely trusting her voice, "You fought your way back. You did it." His gaze, heavy but alive, found hers once again. In that look, she saw it all: resilience, trust, and a spark of something indestructible. Majestic's recovery from surgery was nothing short of a quiet triumph. Each sunrise brought a little more strength back into his body, a little more fire into his eyes. Rebecca stayed by him, just as she had from the beginning, watching the return of the lion they had almost lost. His breathing grew deeper, steadier. His movements, once so fragile, began to carry weight again, his muscles remembering the power they had nearly forgotten. The first time he stood unaided after surgery, it happened without warning. Rebecca had only turned away for a moment, checking the saline line, when she heard the scrape of his claws against the floor. She spun around, heart slamming in her chest, and saw him rising, slow, deliberate, but steady. His legs quivered beneath his weight, yet he held himself tall, chest lifting as though refusing to bow to weakness any longer. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. There was no mistaking it. He wasn't surviving anymore. He was reclaiming his life. Outside the clinic, the enclosure awaited him like a promise of freedom. The day they led him to the gate, the entire camp gathered in silence. Rebecca walked beside him, close enough to feel the strength radiating from his frame. He paused at the threshold, golden eyes scanning the open space, the wild breeze tugging at his mane as if welcoming him home. Then, with quiet determination, he stepped forward into the sun. The light bathed his healed body, and for the first time since the attack, Majestic lifted his head high and let out a roar that split the sky. It wasn't loud from anger, nor from pain. It was something deeper, something raw and defiant. It was the sound of life declaring itself louder than death. Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she pressed her hand over her heart, unable to tear her gaze away. Around her, the Rangers cheered, their voices rough with awe. Across the world, thousands watched live, their hearts rising with every step Majestic took across the open ground. Rebecca could barely speak past the swell of emotion. She whispered as if only he could hear her, "You came back to us, stronger than ever." And Majestic, as though he understood, turned his gaze toward her once more, fierce and unbroken. Majestic had reclaimed the earth beneath his paws. Day after day, he grew stronger beneath the open sky, no longer the broken creature they had first carried into the clinic. His coat gleamed beneath the sun, his strides longer, prouder, until it felt as if the savannah itself had been waiting for his return. Rebecca often stood at the edge of the enclosure, watching him in quiet awe, her heart swelling with every graceful step he took. She had believed in his fight from the first breath he had struggled to take, but seeing him now was something else entirely. It was witnessing a miracle unfold before her eyes. He had become a symbol far beyond what anyone expected. Children who had once feared lions now drew pictures of Majestic with crowns of gold, calling him their hero. Letters still poured into the camp, messages of hope from every corner of the world. People said his fight reminded them not to give up. His survival had become more than a story of one lion. It had become a reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal when kindness is stronger than cruelty. Rebecca never took credit for his recovery. She always pointed back to the lion himself, to his own unbreakable will to live. She was just the hands that helped him stand when he could not. She had been a voice in the quiet that told him to hold on. But it was Majestic who had chosen to rise. It was Majestic who had refused to let his story end in the dust. On the morning they opened the larger sanctuary gates, letting him roam freely in his new forever home, Rebecca walked beside him once more. The sky was clear, the horizon endless. Majestic paused at the threshold, his gaze sweeping across the open plains, then back toward her. For a heartbeat they stood together, two survivors bound by a shared battle. "Go," she said softly, her voice tight with emotion. "This is yours now." Majestic stepped forward into freedom, his figure bold against the rising sun, and as he disappeared into the golden light, Rebecca felt tears spill down her cheeks, not from sadness but from something deeper, the quiet, unshakable truth that kindness had saved him, and through him had reminded the world to believe in second chances. If Majestic's story touched your heart, remember that kindness isn't just a gesture. It's a force that saves lives. Subscribe to our channel for more true, powerful stories that celebrate compassion and resilience in every corner of our world. Every share, every view helps raise awareness for those who can't speak for themselves. Let's spread these ripples of hope together. Join our community and carry this message forward. When we choose kindness, even in the darkest moments, we create miracles. Subscribe now, and let's keep this spirit alive, one story at a time.